Thank you, Poppy. Did you notice what TJ did there? I asked her to read the King James Version instead of the New Revised Standard Translation, because the King James Version is how I heard it every Sunday of my youth, because it was always read in our church at the end of the service. It was called the Last Gospel. I've looked it up in the old prayer book, the 1929 prayer book. It's not called for. So clearly our rector, who later became a bishop, must have just liked it. And since he became a bishop, we can assume that he had a good idea. What resonated with me from hearing that gospel every Sunday from the King James Version was, in him was life, and the life was the light of men, and the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Comprehended it not? What does, in other words, the darkness didn't understand the light? That could be true, but it never made sense to me. So this week I decided to go into my Merriam-Webster and try to find out what that word comprehended has meant at the time of the King James Bible. And I learned that the earlier meaning, and still a lesser meaning of comprehend, is to enclose or confine in some way. So you might hear that line, you might hear it as the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness couldn't cover it, couldn't contain it, couldn't hold it in. So first, let's look at that light. We're talking here about the true light. We're told in the gospel that it was life. The light was life, and it was the light of men. And in the New Testament, that meant the presence of God in our lives, the presence of God. So perhaps we could think of it as the spark of God in us, glowing from creation itself. The true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. But perhaps this spark was dormant, or perhaps before the coming of Christ, it was just no match for the darkness around it, because we hear further in the Gospel of John that Christ gives power to become the sons of God. So then we need to look at that darkness. In the New Testament, it means the absence of God and the forces of evil. Have you ever experienced total darkness? Has anybody ever experienced total darkness? Raise your hands. Bruce, Sheila, Dale, Mike. My husband and I experienced it 50 years ago when we were traveling in the Lake District in England. I'm sure it's much more developed today, but 50 years ago, there wasn't really much there, except great beauty, of course. And we stayed at a farmhouse bed and breakfast. They didn't serve any other meals. And so they told us to walk up the road for dinner, to walk up the road to where there was an inn, an actual full service inn. And we did. And after our dinner, we left the inn and we walked a little ways down to the road. And at that point, the lights from the windows of the inn were no longer, their light was no longer visible. And we were in total darkness. Total darkness. And our first reaction was we became dizzy. We couldn't get our balance, and we clung to each other until we could be sure of standing upright, and then we didn't know where to go. And so we put our minds to it, and we remembered which way we were to turn on the road to get back to the farmhouse. And then we remembered that there was a fence along the road. And so we walked over to the fence. We staggered over to the fence, and we held onto it. It was, a wire. And we walked hand over hand along the fence until we got to the farmhouse. It was total darkness. Was that darkness like the darkness of our time? Is it to feel that you are lost with no bearings, with no sense of what's up, what's down, no sense of balance? And is it also more? Is it also more than that? Is it the selfish disregard for those things and people that we see as not ours, like people that don't look like us? Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's that we think that many things are ours alone and belong to no one else. And so we believe that we can have our way with them, like perhaps our planet. Could it be a disregard, an unwillingness to see those who don't think exactly as we do? And is it perhaps this darkness of our time, is it fear, unmitigated by any fence line that we could follow? But here's the good news. When the true light came into the world, the darkness comprehended it not. Use any meaning for that you want. It could be that the forces of darkness simply don't understand the true light, because there are so many who don't understand this good news that we are telling. Or is it that the darkness could not or cannot crucify the light, cannot engulf it? The darkness, as we know, as we get to the end of the gospel story, tried to kill the word, to crucify the light. But on Easter morning, the light proved that darkness will never have the last word. Thy kingdom come.